Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rebecca. If you don't know exactly who I am a nurse, a certified primal health coach, and I am a certified ketogenic nutrition specialist. And I'm also a PhD coach inside of Dr. Ken Berry's community. And I'm excited today to be talking with the one and only Dave Feldman. Dave, it's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me on, Rebecca.
Yeah, so what I want to kind of talk to you about is the citizen science journey. So you are kind of the king of N equals one, and you've started this movement in science that I feel needs to be shared really like throughout the science world and even just the civilian world. So can you kind of share your journey from being a software engineer to becoming a researcher and advocate for citizen science?
Yeah, from as early as I can remember, I enjoyed playing games and playing with puzzles. And fairly early on, my dad was suggesting, maybe you'd be interested in something like engineering. Like I liked making things with Legos. I discussed this in the documentary that we're going to be releasing in a month, but I um, engineers, a lot by the fact that we tend to take things apart more than we build things, even though we're known more for what we build. And in the case of software, it was like true love. The moment I started being able to write code, and then the code manifest into things like games, like applications, and so forth. So that was an early love for me that just continued to manifest. And then flash forward through an entire lifetime, a career where I had no interest in science and no interest in nutrition. All I wanted to do was program. It was taking a toll on my body because I don't know how many engineers especially software engineers, we're not known for our exceptional diets. And so I weighed about 35 pounds more than I do right now. But I actually looked pretty good amongst my own engineering friends. And I said, I should do something about it. And that's how I started hitting the forums and found out about the low carb diet. And once I did, and I adopted the diet, many will already know this part of the story, my cholesterol jumped up. Yeah. But the piece of this that I think I'm excited to chat with you about is just not having any resources. There wasn't a lot of information already out there on people who do go on a ketogenic diet who see their cholesterol increase. And I understand now why that was back then. And it's because most people who were adopting a low carb diet were, generally speaking, going from more really overweight to modestly more, either normal weight or still a little bit overweight. So even if you lost a lot of weight, if you didn't get to where you were just specifically metabolically fit and healthy, like I actually, even though I was a little bit more metabolically unhealthy heading in the direction of diabetes, I was still like running. I was still in pretty good shape compared to the rest of my engineering friends and so forth. And it turns out that was part of the clue. And I only found that out from doing a lot of experiments on my own.
Okay. And I'm gonna stop you right there before I ask you the next question. Can you see me on camera?
I can't actually, no.
Actually, they said that I've lost my camera. So it's really weird. It was there and then wasn't. Sorry, I'm not sure why that is happening.
Oh, wait. Now I can see you.
Did it come back?
Yes. Yeah, now I can see you.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So sorry about that. So do you feel like your engineering skills contributed to your ability to kind of transition into this role? I know you said about the building and taking things apart. So yeah. Was there anything else that kind of also
contributed? And this is kind of, I want to do something I haven't done on other podcasts because you kind of invited me to open this door.
Okay.
A lot of times I feel as though people think that because I'm an engineer, I must therefore have this special set of skills they don't have. And but the truth is, we're all kind of engineers at our core. We all are making observations and then deciding for ourselves how much we're going to act on that information, right? And the main difference with engineers is we kind of almost expect things to be complicated and even get somewhat excited about the level of complication. You know, we're excited to open that clock because we know there's just got to be more to it than the two hands that we see that are moving in front of us. And then sure enough, it's complicated and then we're like, oh, okay. But in reality, everybody's capable of profound discovery when they're motivated enough. And so just like I'm sure, like me, you know, many people who, when met with a big life challenge, they became educated. And in this day and age, you can suddenly hit the internet and learn quite a bit.
And
Now,
have access to scholarly stuff. It's not just like
yes,
somebody's opinion. It's legit science. It's already out there.
right. And so to that extent, you know, what I want is for anybody who's listened this far to not disable themselves from making those key discoveries on what they need, on what they can find out on their own. Because I hope that my story can continue to serve that for other people, because I didn't figure out everything that I know today and that we published all on my own. I've often had people who themselves are also not scientists or engineers who have thought of something that they can, you know, send my direction. And I try to credit that as many times as I can. It's often, let me give you an example. This is going to get a little bit, tiny bit geeky, but bear with me. It'll just be for like 30 seconds. One of the components to the model that I ultimately have had some great co-authors and we've been able to build it out, called the lipid energy model. It posits that when you run low enough on fuel that isn't fat, which is glucose, especially in a place that it's stored, which is the liver, then that's what activates this cascade and creates this phenotype and this, all that other stuff. But while talking about it out loud, I would say, man, if only there was some other way to independently check this without actually going on a low carb diet. And a person who wasn't even into the science at all was just like, well, isn't it probably a disease that does that? And I honestly hadn't thought about it up until that point. I was like, oh yeah, a disease that prevents you from storing glucose. If I follow the logic, that would probably have commonalities with this thing that I'm positing, that I myself am experiencing with my LDL cholesterol going up. I wonder if people have a problem storing glucose, which is called glycogen. I wonder if there's a disease. Sure enough, there is a glycogen storage disease, GSD. And sure enough, it complemented this research. It actually helped to prove this. Well, I'm bringing this up not because, I helped to connect these dots and therefore I should be given all the credit. No, this is my research is written by many authors. And this was somebody who was not even that much into the science at all. They just had an observation that I couldn't think of. And so I like to bring up examples like that to emphasize that we're all in this together, right? Yeah. And sometimes the best ideas are coming from outside the room, of the people who are most into it, because you can often get distracted by what you're looking for.
Well, what I like is that you guys are like, or people like you are seeing a need and filling it in a very abstract way, and kind of going into that, like, you have created the Citizen Science Foundation. Can you talk a little bit about why? Because I think I know some of the why behind it, but I want you to tell us the why behind it, and why a foundation funded outside of the norm.
Yeah, you know what? I'll even go a little more in depth on this one than I have in other podcasts.
Okay.
So we're gonna kind of give the very high level elevator pitch of the research. And I was doing a lot of experiments myself. I was blogging about it. This is 2016, 2017, 2018-ish, around that period of time. And as I started building out this model, making these observations, blogging about it, more people were sharing data back that seemed to be reinforcing it. I said, there is this phenotype, the one I was mentioning before, that doesn't just have high LDL, but also has high HDL and low triglycerides, like me, this triad of these three things together. High LDL cholesterol, which is typically considered concerning, high HDL cholesterol, which is considered good, low triglycerides. Okay. So it's great. We've identified these people. Let's study them. Let's, and I back then thought all I need to do is just get in touch with scientists who study lipids for a living, lipidologists, and that they were going to be falling over themselves to study this group, because after all, how rare is this that you actually get a high level of LDL, but alongside low cardiovascular disease? And I mean, we now know, it's now been like 7 years or something. There's very little interest in like really putting in some solid work on getting this research done. I think that, don't get me wrong, I think that interest is definitely growing. And I think that there are some great scientists that we're connecting with now. But at that time, I kept thinking, wow, so how's this research going to happen? I can't seem to get funding, because I'm told that there's really two ways you get funding. One is you get it from the government through something like an NIH grant, but you have to be a grant writer. So you have to like already have some scientists on board who know how to write grants, who know how to pitch it. But even then, there's no guarantee at all. And the NIH is kind of notorious for not wanting to fund a lot of low carb research. It's not, and to be fair to them, they only have so many resources. How do they know what's important, what isn't? So you're kind of stuck. Because the other piece is something that has a connection to a business model, something you're selling, right? So some device, some medication to treat a problem. It's, as a researcher told me off the record at one point, he said, this research can only lose people money. It can't actually, it's not going to be of a net benefit. And so I said, you know what if I just crowdfund it? Coming from technology, you probably heard of something called a Kickstarter.
Yeah.
And or Indiegogo.
Yeah.
And it's called crowdfunding because you basically are going to the general audience, like GoFundMe, and saying, hey, let's go and put the money together ourselves and see if we could raise the money to do a study.
Yeah.
And where I made a choice that I will forever be appreciative that I made that early was, wait, I can't do something like a GoFundMe because I want to be a good steward of people's money. So they take kind of a bigger fee. It's also a little bit less accountable, frankly, relative to if it were a charity.
Yes.
So I looked into seeing if I could just literally form a charity, a citizen science charity. I mean, I'd never seen anything like that was in nutrition, especially. And so I researched what it would take and spent a lot of money, a lot of my own money, to pay a lot of high-priced lawyers to put together a good one. Because this is the key, Rebecca. If I was right, if this research yielded the kinds of results that I thought that they would, then going all the way back to the beginning, I need to make the steps correct in the first place. And the best thing that I could do to protect the future research, if the results turned out the way I was hoping they would, is to have it properly fielded from day one. Yeah. So public charity, raise the money legitimately, be as transparent as I could about every step of the way, And that was the dream of the Citizen Science Foundation, and that's what it is today.
Well, I was like, the question I have down is like an example of a project, but it's your lean mass hyper responder project right now. That's the big one that it's funding, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, in effect, I did form the Citizen Science Foundation predominantly for that purpose. Of course, we have interests in future endeavors of future research, but this was predominantly a vehicle to make this study happen.
Yeah. So with that, I know that, and this is the only thing I kind of want to go into on the lean mass hyper responder study. This is it, because I know COSI is coming up, and we'll talk. I'll have you talk about that. But has there been any new questions that this study has brought forth that you want to take and now do another study to answer that question? What new has come out of that? What new hypothesis?
Well, actually, of course, I was very excited to see how many of my existing assumptions were getting tested with this one study.
Mhm.
But appropriately, as I was saying on the onset, this is one study. Assuming it goes the way we hope it will, then it necessitates on us to get another study going, because as I would say, a single study can be groundbreaking, but replication of these things help to move the needle. So to kind of answer your question, it's not just that it's opening up new questions, but to some degree, you actually, if you have something really groundbreaking, you need to further whatever your new studies are, they need to further build on the existing data to help establish that it indeed is showing a pattern, if it is, right? Yeah. Now, as far as looking ahead in advance with the data that we already have coming out, actually, that's one of the most exciting things, is we have a lot of the blood work in what's called a blood bank, where basically we have some coming analyses that are going to be done, for example, and I'd already had this set up from our protocol, such as the research center in Finland that looks at very deep biometrics of the lipid profile themselves of the blood that we've collected from participants. And we'll be able to answer more advanced questions that will get a little nerdy. I'm not going to go into them right now, but I'll just say it'll provide us a better insight as to what's going on, why there's the higher levels of LDL, and whether or not I'm right on some of these core assumptions that are in the model that we described. So beyond the question of risk, which was what this experiment really is, it's at the core, its main endpoint is cardiovascular disease and development of plaque for these 100 lean mass hyperresponders. There's the question of mechanism, the why. And I think that we'll have that not just in the existing data that we're collecting now, but to your point, yes, with the future study, that may inform us on some new questions that we'd like to get answered as well.
That's awesome. And that going into, that takes us into COSI, which is coming up. And that is what, in a month? It's a month away.
We're recording this on the 7th of January, and on February 7th will be when the documentary will have its special showing. It'll be the very beginning of the conference.
Yeah, that's amazing. 1 month before, and you're here. And so with that, can you talk about COSI? And I know that last year was a big hit, and I saw all my friends going to it, and I wasn't able to go. And then this year, again, they're all able to go, and I can't go. But what is your goals with COSI, and how's it different this year from last year?
Well, of course, for one, we're premiering the documentary. Actually, I'm not even supposed to say premiere. I'll just say we're having a special showing, a first look, if you will, of the documentary, and a huge event that's going to be around it. Months later, it'll get released on a streaming platform. But that's a great way to kick off what is, as I like to say, a charity fundraising event dressed up as a conference. So even though it's a conference, and even though there's perks based on, how much money you donate and so forth, at the end of the day, ours is different in that every single person who's involved in the conference outside of, third party services, we're all donating our time and our dime. Every speaker is coming at their own expense, and bless them for doing this. It's all for the cause.
Yeah.
And to do so, all of that money that's getting raised beyond what we have to pay for base costs, which is mainly paid for by the sponsors, their money goes straight to the second study. The lean mass hyperresponder was the first study. We've completed it. The next study I'm calling the triad study. And we're hoping that this conference will help close a major stage of our funding for it so that we can get it started.
That's amazing. So you did talk about the documentary. Now, is that documentary like throughout the whole entire lean mass hyper responder study? 'Cause I didn't even know you were doing one.
Yeah, basically, it started at the beginning of 2023,
Okay.
and started capturing the first data that I got to see in stages of the study behind the scenes. So, as the person who's funding the study, who runs the foundation that is funding the study, as would typically happen, the principal investigator in charge, which in this case is Dr. Matthew Budoff, will have, even if I was just a regular client, would have them come in, say, here's, for example, the first tranche of data. And so the first tranche I was able to see was the first 100 scans. Mm-hmm. And the first 100 scans provided some information. You'll get to see that in the film and my reaction, because the other component of this is that, unlike a client that doesn't have any cameras around, I had cameras around. There was a film crew that was working with me the whole time. The amazing Jen Eisenhardt, who's already done several documentaries, including Fat Fiction, which I recommend. You can actually see it for free on YouTube right now. And was like working with me to be sure that the film crew was there at every major stage of the study. It picked up all kinds of different things there, but also we got a bunch of personal stories, people who've taken on keto, and especially who've used it for medical purposes, which is something I really love about our film. Is it's talking about cholesterol, which of course is not just the center of the study, but the center of my work. But people like, for example, my collaborator Nick Norwitz, who has a very good medical reason to stay ketogenic. He has severe ulcerative colitis, and he uses keto to manage it. We interview Jen Unwin, who works with her food addiction for it. We interview Robin Dobbins, who suffered from bipolar. And it's really, I love it because the film actually does so many things at the same time. Mm-hmm. It's almost like cholesterol as a subject is like the gateway drug to get you inside. And then you actually learn a lot, for example, of these new frontiers of where keto is being used as a therapy for a lot of different things I myself wasn't that aware were possible. And so, yeah.
That's what we're seeing in the carnivore community too. Because if you haven't seen the Healing Humanity documentary that I'm involved with, they are showing all these stories of healing from people going from eating a standard American to carnivore, and just all the different stories involved with that. So it is and it's basically ketogenic, but all meat. And it's interesting seeing these things open up and following them to their conclusion, especially us listen to part of a podcast with you with Metabolic Mind and the things that they're doing, the Bazooki group with mental health, and just getting these studies out there.
They're incredible. It's hard to even imagine keto and carnivore without the amazing work that Metabolic Mind has been doing, and how much they've been advancing research, especially in that area, which I feel like is just an undiscovered frontier. There's just so much that we're finding out.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're starting to see that the breakdown of the metabolic system starts with a mental illness. with Dr. Palmer's book, kind of the brain energy book kind of really just exploded that. And he works with the Bazooki group. And it's just amazing that we're finding this out. And I think that that's important. Mental health is important. And the studies are going from there to autism, and you're just seeing this whole frontier open. And autism's close to my heart because both my children are autistic. So just seeing that, it's very, I don't know, invigorating seeing that people are looking at it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I agree. It's the one thing that I have to concede has been a tough part of being in this space is, as I'm sure you're very aware, there's a lot of emotional attachment that people form with their diets, especially if they really enjoy them. And I know a number of people who really enjoy the carnivore diet substantially, but I also know a number of people who will concede up front. They'll say, actually, I probably would be more liberal with some things that I eat, but I've found so much benefit from being on carnivore for me in my specific circumstances. And the one thing that they kind of have to struggle with beyond just their own interest in the adherence, if that is a challenge for them, which of course for some people it's not, like Sean Baker just loves his meat all day long, right? Yeah. Is the level of pushback that they get socially. And that part I struggle with a lot, because when it comes to things like health, everyone's on their own health journey. You don't know necessarily why somebody's choosing things beyond what may be appetizing or a food preference. But I've experienced this myself so many times that it's somewhat comical how that same diet I was describing to you that I eat with my engineers, having a big pile of fries with processed cheese on top, nobody would bat an eye at that. But if I have a giant steak in front of me, they'll start talking about the saturated fat and how that's going to clog my arteries. I'll be like, you don't feel like my loaded fries were at least a comparable, if not far worse, health risk up to that point?
Yeah, I've been on this journey for almost, oh my gosh, how long now? Since 2018. So it hasn't killed me yet. Not yet. So
yeah, and that's the thing. I feel like I try to be the best example I can to not just to others, but to myself as well. I do think I obviously try to practice more of attracting flies with honey than with vinegar, right? But I won't lie. There's some times where I think of some very sarcastic zingers that come to mind, and I'm like typing out the tweet, and I'm like, and I delete it. But
that's kind of where I'm going next, is how you deal. Like, you are so nice. I think you have been described to me by our mutual friend Siobhan as just like the nicest guy on the planet. And I see your responses on Twitter, and they are so, like, they are the nicest slaps in the face ever. And so you do get a lot of pushback. You are turning things on its heads when it comes to the paradigm of the cholesterol. There's a lot of pushback. So can you talk a little bit about these challenges, and like how you're so nice? How do you do it?
So first things first, I'm definitely nowhere close to the nicest person on the planet. It's very kind when people say that. I think because on social media, and especially on X, a lot of times the loudest voices get the most attention. So there's this comparison that comes around naturally. There is another component, which is that where I probably am different than a lot of people who value being in pleasant conversations more often, which is I value what's known as positive conflict. So the conversation still needs to happen. I do believe in debates fervently. I think we're lacking in productive, respectful debates. And to me, that's at the heart of what science really is. I mean, never mind the citizen part. I think formal scientists should be the strongest examples of the people who can take as much as they can of their own personal biases and especially emotions out through practice, through discipline. Because of course it's there. Our wiring to do that is there. We want to have strong reactions. So I'm okay with what I just told you, which is that sometimes I'm like frustrated and I'm typing something out, and I don't want to give anyone the impression that I don't deal with that. I do. But by the same token, that sometimes people sort of say, well, you're smart, because you're an engineer, and therefore I couldn't figure things out. And I'm like, it's just not true. Anybody can figure things out. By the same token, I can say anybody can be nicer. It does take working at it. It does take practice, frankly. And I can make the case that it's not just about, doing it for virtue's sake. It is a strategy as well. If what you're trying to accomplish is to change minds, even if you can't necessarily change the mind of the person who's across from you, including changing your own mind. Because if you can't win your argument by being productive and respectful, that should say something to you about the strength of your argument, right? So
once they start with attacking character,
yeah, and I like to say this to my biggest detractors all the time. I say, look, think about it this way: if you're keeping it reasonable and respectful, you only have one way to lose. But if you're throwing in a lot of personal attacks, then you have more than one way to lose. And it doesn't ultimately work for the long term. Things like sarcasm are so satisfying in the moment, but it's usually a short-term gain for a long-term cost. And especially in the age of the internet, that's the trade-off. I definitely have sarcastic thoughts, and for what it's worth, I will occasionally say them in private. But more often than not, I'm always trying to think of ways to just try to steer myself towards the positive as much as possible, because I think that is ultimately more pro-scientific.
Yeah, I think one of the funnest ones was how you comparing and contrasting how you reacted to Lane Norton versus to how Nick Norwitz reacted to Lane Norton. Two very different, challenges there. And it was interesting because you're close with Nick, and of course, because Dr. Norwitz is also working with you with the study, and then Dr. Sotomoda, which I don't see much from Dr. Sotomoda, but it's interesting that there's the two sides to that coin. Like one is a little pushy, little button pushy, and you're so nice and kind. And it's always labeled a respectful reply.
Yeah, and we both mutually own that. It's kind of a running joke with us that I'm sort of thought of more as the good cop and he's the bad cop. Per se. Okay. He's and to be sure, if you follow Nick, it's kind of he's generally very positive and respectful, but if it's time to tussle, he's ready to jump in the ring, and he's
tiny but mighty. Yeah,
he's ready to mix it up, right? Yeah. And so to that extent, we make for an interesting contrast, and no question, there's some times where I'm sure there's definitely some times where he said, you let them off totally easy. You could have been doing XYZ, or could have said some things. And there's some times where I'm poking at him and going, that was a little strong. Yeah. But that's to be expected. I think we're good influences on each other on that. We take the good from each side.
It's a balance, I'm sure.
Yeah, so, and to be sure, I'll add one more thing, which is that there's a friend of mine who made the point that, to be fair, while we all have our own role in advancing the discussion, if it was all Dave Feldman's just clones being the way that I am, it's also very easy to ignore. There is something to be said about the squeaky wheel component. It's just not how I'm built. I'm not one to want to, engage in that manner. So
And
that's
poke the bear.
yeah.
But you are, in a way, because there's a very large science conglomerate and a very large, this is the way we've always done things. And you're poking that bear right now. And I don't even know what to say about that.
No, well,
I hope you turn it upside down.
yeah, but that's the this is a kind of a geek reference, but one of my engineering friends who's followed me from day one and really enjoys watching it says that I'm kind of a good vehicle, he thinks, to delivering this payload of science. And the geek reference is, it says from Dune, it's the slow blade that penetrates the shield. So and I think that there's some value to what he's pointing out, which is that it's true. Perhaps if I was a bit more antagonistic from the front end, that would be the excuse to be able to ignore this research. And it makes it harder to ignore the research when clearly I'm doing everything I can to be as careful both in how I present it and, again, getting back to the foundation and making sure the way by which we raise, all of our money, by the way, is raised from individuals. There were opportunities to have particular industries that I could have gotten connections with that might have, I didn't pursue it even when it was offered up, but that might have been pushed against for potential conflicts of interest. And right now, like I said, I feel like it protects the research the best to just do the harder work of literally getting every last dollar we can from individuals for that very reason, because it gets harder and harder and harder to come at this research from any other angle than the actual evidence itself.
And I love that that's your focus. And you've always said this from the beginning, that you will tell the results even if you didn't like it.
That's correct.
Yeah. So, which honesty, it's nice to have honesty in science.
Well, I joke about this, but it's not a joke. I kind of have a superpower, if you will, that other researchers don't, which is that I'm not a researcher. And to put it rather bluntly, I make a lot more money doing software development. So I always had, at any point in time, if I found out that my optimism was not met with the data, I could just drop everything I'm doing, go back to building the next generation gambling platform here in Las Vegas and make several fold more than I do right now. So it's kind of an irony, because there's just a component of, I don't want to say it's reluctance per se, but the drive is very much all about us actually turning over something truly novel, something truly new that keeps me going. And at the same time, I'm fine with being wrong. I'm about as well positioned as somebody could be to find that out, report it, and then walk away.
Nice. So that kind of pushes us to the next topic, is where you see the future of, citizen science going. What do you see the role is going to be? Do you feel like you've kind of broken a new horizon with having n=1s? Because that's really kind of where it all started, is this whole concept of n=1.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, you can look up what were originally known as gentlemen scientists. Gentlemen scientists were not formally trained. A good example would be Benjamin Franklin was a quote unquote gentleman scientist. These are typically back then men of means who would decide to take it upon themselves to do different things and then publish it, and they would self-publish, and it was insanely expensive back then because you had to actually go through a printing press or something to at least put out a pamphlet, if not an entire book, and then send it out. And that was, a rich person's game at that time. But that, again, getting back to the core of curiosity that was there. So flash forward to now, it's not so much that I would say I've helped to really spark the movement of N-of-1 experiments, because I myself have been inspired by many, including from scientists like Barry Marshall, for example, who did one of the most boss experiments ever with H. pylori. Look that up. It's really an amazing story. Literally drank a petri dish after doing an endoscopy and proved he could give himself an ulcer that way. But
gross.
the
As a
yeah,
nurse, that is really gross.
it is. But props to him. He pulled it off, and 15 years later would get the Nobel Prize for it, and it would be a very. And again, this is strictly an N1, and he was the person. He was the person at the center of his own research that was willing to take that shot. So yeah, all the usual caveats to be mindful of things like safety, of course. But let's face it, things like the carnivore diet, they originated from people who took it upon themselves, usually out of a sense of desperation, to just try something, anything that would work, for which it not only seems to have succeeded for multiple people, but that was, frankly, from where I'm standing, the only way it was going to happen. Because in the same way the low carb movement is a true grassroots movement, it didn't arise because some doctors suddenly read a groundbreaking study that some scientist did that said, hey, actually, it's much better for everybody to be on a high saturated fat, high red meat diet. No, it was a number of people outside of science who were saying, this just makes the most sense to me, that if I have a problem regulating glucose in my body, I should just consume less carbs.
Yeah.
And one of the people we interview in the study is the man himself, Dr. Bernstein, who, by the way, was an engineer and became a doctor just so that they'd take him more seriously. And incidentally, it frankly didn't work as well as he would hope, and as much as I would have hoped. But getting back to sort of the way we started this conversation, every single one of us, it's upon us to help contribute where we can. And it's just that drive, it's that interest in doing it. So I'm not a me without all of you. Like I wouldn't have known about the lean mass hyperresponder phenotype were it not for me seeing the patterns and getting pattern recognition from having the cholesterol code website so that people would keep commenting it in. And then me putting those dots together and then eventually writing that article in 2017. Even then, I didn't really know how prominent it would be. It turned out it was really prominent. And folks like the gentleman I mentioned from earlier, who led me on to the glycogen storage disease, all of these things, that to me is where science can go with the help of things like social media. And social media is a large data aggregate, but there's just no getting around it. We have to acknowledge that this also highlights the limitations of traditional science because of how much traditional science seems to, like I was saying before, be a challenge for funding. And therefore, we have to not just do things like sharing in social media, but I think, at least I hope, that there'll be more endeavors like what we're doing with the Lean Mass Hyperresponder study, that more people will see advantages in crowdfunding research that people want to have happen. And I hope the Citizen Science Foundation will be a means by which to do that in the future as well.
Yeah, I really think that I do feel like this is the future of science, is more stuff like this. And it's going to become even more credible as the years go on. I think it was last year, over 10,000 papers and studies were retracted, because of conflicts of interest and people paying peer reviewers that were being paid by big food and big pharma. And it's like, I feel like you've made such a safety net with the Citizen Science Foundation and laid such a nice groundwork for it to be very clean from the beginning. And, I think that it's a kind of a model that I hope gets replicated over and over, with yours being the number one. Hopefully that's the goal, right?
Yeah, I hope so too. I can't emphasize enough that we seem to have ran this cycle before a number of times, but at the bottom line is that we really do need to understand that if there's science that so many of us collectively think should be happening, this is maybe one of the best times for us to come together, given how prominent and capable social media is at making that happen faster. Before you'd have things like letter writing campaigns and phone banks and that kind of thing. But yeah, we still need to do good science. That's the whole reason you want to do actual IRB approved experiments, and on top of that also get them published. You need to do the formal as well as the informal. But I think we're helping to prove this model is possible. And you're 100% right. I would love it if there were 100 Citizen Science Foundation, popping up everywhere, so long as they still keep these major tenets in mind. Be transparent, be good stewards of people's trust in you, because that's what will make this a real viable possibility.
Yeah, I think we're in a really good time right now for this. And I love what you said is that we need to kind of do it together and come together. I know that there's a lot of people, even though Lane Norton, might not have the same viewpoint as us, his goal really is this something similar, to people need to be healthy and have a better lifestyle. And I think we all need to come together and do that, whether we're low carb, paleo, keto, carnivore. We all need to come together for health, and to make these things, kind of happen. We need to play nice.
Well, and to be, again, like with Nick, people have their own different styles. But I'll just say for myself, I can only speak for myself. If you went on a carnivore diet and you found it wasn't for you, and then you went on a plant-based diet and you found your health improved dramatically, I couldn't be happier for you.
Yeah.
But also vice versa. If you were on a plant-based diet and it just wasn't working for you, and you found carnivore and you found that it was working for you, I couldn't be happier. Everyone is on their own health journey. And that is one thing that I don't know. I try to be an optimist. I hope that a lot of the kind of diet tribalism will become less and less prominent as it becomes more and more obvious that none of this kind of sticks for long if people really do find what works for them better this way.
Yeah, exactly. So we're at 47 minutes and your time is very important. So I've got a couple more questions and then I'll let you head out because I'm going to try to keep you to only an hour. So what advice do you give to someone that's no formal science training, but they have this passion for research? What's your advice to those people?
Well, I think that there's kind of two categories. Category one, if you are just, you may have different ways by which you arrived here, but if you find that you just can't help but read studies, you can't help but want to understand what's going on behind the scenes, and you're thinking to yourself, dang it, this is unfortunately I already have a career and I already have a life and I can't start over at age 30, 40, or 50. You absolutely can. Science is one of those fields. It's not like, say, being an athlete on a football field. You can start doing it today. So consider, even though I've kind of brought up what the limitations are of formal science, consider potentially going to school for it. You could even do virtual schools and so forth. And I've known many people who've done this. And it's possible I may have some of this in my future. Not sure yet. The other component is somebody who doesn't believe they're going to really have a very long-term stake in just expanding on science. but as a particular scientific challenge that's unique to them or to a family member. Don't underestimate your ability to learn enough to at least make more informed decisions. A lot of times it's not about whether you can become the equivalent of a specialist in that field. A lot of times it's just about finding the kinds of answers that they may not be seeing themselves. In the same way, a lot of the big low carb doctors these days, like David Unwin, they'll mention how they had a pivotal patient. It may not even be the first one. It might be like the 7th one or the 20th one who adopted a particular diet. In David Unwin's case, it's a low carb diet. And that got them interested because of what the patient was telling them that made sense to the doctor, who was more informed in the area of patient care, but just wasn't connecting those dots before. So in the same way that you might want to, as just an everyday Joe scientist, want to better understand a particular topic, don't underestimate your own ability to learn enough about it that you can then consult with others and have more informed and intelligent questions. Or for that matter, steer them into a direction that might suit your needs a lot better. I think a message I can never state strongly enough is I believe people get in their own way a lot more than they need to.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that you do, we haven't talked about it, but I'm going to put a banner up, is where people can start their own experiments, is on their own blood work. And I'm going to pop that up there. So Own Your Labs. Dave Feldman is the co-owner of Own Your Labs with Siobhan Huggins. So you can go over, except for a couple states. There's a few states you can't do it because their laws are fun.
6 at the moment. And again, it's only because of the local laws. But yes, thank you for the opportunity on the plug. It literally was born out of us doing our own. Siobhan is the other co-owner. We both have done just so many of our own experiments. More and more people were saying, how can we get hooked up with your doctor if we could do cash pay also for our labs? And eventually we're just like, you should just throw up a website. But what is different about our website, because there are many others that do it, and we'd encourage you to comparison shop to the others as well, is we incentivize people. We have an additional form. It's taken down at the moment, but it'll be back up again shortly, where we give 10% off. It's called the Citizen Science Discount, 10% off for people who contribute their anonymized data to a data archive, because we want to make it accessible. There's very little data on, especially low carbers, that's open source, that's open science. And we want to contribute to that. And that's with no personal gain on our side. We just created the mechanism by which to get it. But the other piece of it is that actually we're kind of like the customers running the store. Our prices are really good because we frankly just keep our margin fixed at where it's at. And so as we keep getting more bulk buying power, when they do a price drop because of how much volume we're moving, we don't change our markup. So actually that really does just keep dropping our prices on net. And so it's kind of a quantity model, if you will. But at the end of the day, I just want people to be able to get okay, here's a great example, insulin. How many people do you know who just haven't gotten their fasting insulin tested yet, but are interested in doing so? Right.
Do you know how many doctors, like my brother went to get my brother's name's David also. And he's got diabetes, and his doctor, he asked for one, and she's like, I don't even know what to do with it. I don't know what to do. She wouldn't order it because she didn't know what to do with it. It's like, okay, wow, nice.
It's the single most common answer. And unfortunately, like, if you can have your doctor order it and it's free, do that.
Yes.
A million ways from Sunday, right? And some will do that. Never be afraid to just ask, right? But if you wanted to, I'm looking right now. So we offer like $14.40.
Okay.
Right? You could, and we cover the venipuncture fee. And most any other site, they're going to both charge for the venipuncture fee, because that is cost, and for the tax. So it's possible that we might even take a loss if somebody just ordered this straight up. I can't say that I know that for sure, but it's the point is we the reason we do that, the reason why we cover those costs is if you're budget conscious enough to where you can only really get one test, we'd love to make that as cheap as possible. And insulin is a great example of that, right? I would love it if there was just a whole bunch more people who just straight got fasting insulin because of how much I believe in that test in particular. I mean, I don't know how familiar you are with Joseph Kraft, but wow, the guy should have a Nobel Prize right now. And fasting insulin is just a no-brainer. If it can help indicate potential diabetes, like as a leading indicator for as much as a decade to 2 decades, of course, why not get it before you actually have problems and you've got the breakout and it, the insulin starts going down because the pancreatic cells, the beta cells are now becoming dysfunctional, and now your glucose is going up, which is a late stage indicator of diabetes, right?
Yeah.
So sorry if I got a little bit on a soapbox there, but that's it.
No, it's a good soapbox. It's a great soapbox.
And so this is why, like, we don't have any business associations with any business entities, which kind of gets back to the whole conflict of interest outside of goodwill related things, right? So for example, Keto Chow might send us Keto Chow stuff for an experiment. But we don't have any real quid pro quos per se, or anything along those lines. And there's no product that I'm selling outside of Own Your Labs being the one thing that was a no-brainer for us, because we want that. Like, that's diagnostic. That's where you're getting information for yourself, and that's individual to you. And it really is funny because insulin, I think, was the catalyst. Insulin was the one test that I was like, wow, we can get it for this cost. I'd love it if anybody who just wanted to, that I could just point somewhere and be like, then go get it here. I wish insulin was a part of every basic blood panel, period, whether it came from your doctor or anything else. Anyway, all right, soapbox over.
It leads me to, like, so I'm in school to be a nurse practitioner. I still have a little over a year left, but it's like, it's amazing that it wasn't taught that you need to do it. It wasn't taught that it was all just go to the ADA and follow their guidelines. Yeah. And I'm like, in my practice one day, this is going to be my goal. My goal is that everybody, when they come in, will automatically have a fasting insulin. It will be mandatory, because then we can hopefully head off diabetes before it ever gets to the stage where there's complications. That's the goal.
Yes. If there was such a thing as a non-invasive wearable that wasn't just picking up your glucose, which we need, that'll be powerful, but that was somehow able to pick up insulin. I know it's a huge ask. Technologically, it's very difficult.
Somebody watching, if you know somebody that can do this, there's an opportunity. Contact Dave Feldman.
Sure. Listen, it would make billions of dollars because it could already be used by existing diabetics. Yep. But if there was such a thing, if you had effectively an automatic oral glucose tolerance test, Kraft style, that also picked up your insulin, you could see what your insulin AUC, your area under the curve, was over the course of a day. It would have such a profound impact on the development of diabetes, which kind of gets back to the whole idea behind not just Own Your Labs, but just direct-to-consumer labs in the first place, and kind of gets back to the larger arc of what we're talking about. You and I value insulin really high. Why? Because the data has been there. I mentioned Joseph Kraft. His work precedes me existing. I wasn't even alive when he was doing his initial research, and he should have the Nobel Prize right now because it's only continued to prove true. And that was before the obesity epidemic climbed in, right? So we could write, I'll bet you could go back to the 70s and you would find very little insulin area under the curve for children then. But I'll bet if you could do it right now, if there was a kind way to pick up insulin area under the curve for children right now, And if it was more common for them to get tested for fasting insulin, I'll bet you could see the contrast this moment. And it's that part's heartbreaking for me. So if you want to see one area where I get a bit ornery, this is definitely one of them, because I feel like we have more than enough data. We have so much in front of us right now to take seriously the concept of insulin resistance and therefore hyperinsulinemia. And so that's why this was a no-brainer for us.
Yeah, children. When I think about kids, it bothers me. Like, we have such an obesity epidemic in children, and both my kids have been on a ketogenic diet for autism for a while. So my kids are thin, and relatively thin. My son is really thin, but my daughter she's female, so she's where she needs to be. But it's like I see all the kids, other kids their age, and I'm just like, it's sad. It kind of hurts, and it's sad. And I try not to be judgmental on the parents, but they don't know. They don't know. So you don't know what you don't know.
Well, I grew up in a different era, and I know what my middle school looked like. I know what my high school looked like, and we're situated right now. Our neighborhood is nearby a middle school, and so I see the difference between the middle school that I grew up in versus the one that's here. Mm-hmm. And I don't. It's just tough because and this is why the concept of something like not just Own Your Labs, but just things like wearables, I'm hopeful for, because the more that we can gather data non-invasively and frequently, the more you can. I find, I don't know about you, I find that nothing is as powerful a motivator for most people, not all people, but for most people, than the data itself, because there isn't emotion tied around it, because there isn't judgment tied around it. It's I have this running line with my family where the ones who are trying to be on keto, for example, will get back their blood work and they'll be like, but I've been doing keto, and I'll say, don't convince me, convince your blood work. That's my line. Right? It brings it all back home, because that's where the N of one, at the end of the day, we're all N of ones anyway. Whether you're doing an experiment or not, you have reason to get data on yourself if you're struggling. Or even if you're not struggling, it can tell you
if you're dinky. Like, I'm not a diabetic. I wear a CGM. Why? Yeah. Because it's interesting. Like, it's interesting to go lift weights. Like this morning, lifted heavy. What happens? Blood glucose goes into the 120s. And it's like, oh my gosh. No, but really it's, my body's like, hey, you just worked out. Let me pump some glucose, So, it's interesting to see that when you just didn't know. Yes. Pop Eater says we're number nerds. Yes.
Yeah. There's a great statement in engineering. If you don't measure it, you can't manage it.
Exactly. So that is that's going to close us out, because I want to be respectful of your time, but I've got 2 fun questions.
Go ahead.
So what is your favorite book that is not science related?
Oh, that's easy. I like, there's a book called Winning with Integrity, and it's based on a sports attorney. I want to say this is 1992, 93, something like that. And it's actually the sports attorney that the movie Jerry Maguire is based off of. And that book had a lot of impact on me. That was, I really appreciate it, because it gets into sort of the things I was chatting about earlier as far as positive conflict, negotiating, but still, trying to keep it productive.
Okay. And last one is favorite workout song.
Oh,
what's on your playlist?
Gosh, it's funny because it changes at different times. And I was trying, so I think, almost nobody's going to know this one, but back in the day when Nintendo 64 was coming out.
Mm-hmm.
It had a game at launch called Killer Instinct. And Killer Instinct, the cartridge came with a CD that had like original music that was like techno music that came with it. And to this day, I still find them to be some of the most pumping sounds. So I'm not sure if it's on Spotify, but the one that I like the most is called Oh Yeah. So if you look at if you look up Killer Instinct, maybe it's on Spotify, in which case you can just check out the whole soundtrack. Oh Yeah, I think is the one that I was most recently listened to, but there's also Do It Now, I think. But they're awesome. They're, from a workout standpoint, they're usually one of the ones I throw in that really gets me going.
I didn't expect that.
No, nobody does. It's so esoteric. But I
think we're from the same era. I think we were born in the. Were you born in the 80s or 70s?
70s.
70s. Okay.
Yeah.
So, or early 80s. So.
Yeah, I like, and to be sure, as techno-ish music goes, I love a lot of 80s techno, and I like a lot of early 90s hip hop, like CNC Music Factory, MC Hammer,
like
old school. Hammer Pants, I had them.
Oh, yeah. I did too. I did too. It's all good. Oh, I'm not Pop Eater. I'm not surprised. Geeks are geeks. I am proud to be a geek. I'm okay with it. And you know what? My son, I'm going to look up that soundtrack because my son is into some really weird techno, like old school stuff. So he's an old soul. Older soul, I should say. But yeah, this has been great. Thank you so much for like coming on my little tiny channel.
Absolutely. And sorry, we had a little trouble trying to get the wires connected, but
no, I am persistent. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. And are you coming to the conference, by the way?
I'm not going to be able to be there. I have this semester is a core course that if I don't make an 80 in it, I fail. So we are not on the A, B, C, D. It's like if you don't make an 80 or above, you're done. It's over. So
well, then you better pass that course for us.
That's my goal. It's my goal. Just prayers and good vibes. All right. Thanks everybody for joining in, and we will see you later. Bye guys.